The extra seal arrived before breakfast and immediately looked disappointed in the kingdom. It refused herring, slapped a medic's bucket into the tide pool, and took the highest sunning rock like it had inherited coastal authority. By the time the palace bells began screaming that the Alpha King was missing, Mireva Quen had already written on her slate, large gray male, no visible wound, severe temper, suspiciously noble posture. She stared at the last two words. Then she rubbed them out with her sleeve. Seals did not have noble posture. Seals had whiskers, fish breath, and the moral confidence of wet pillows. They slept in piles, argued with gulls, and treated every available surface as a personal throne. That did not make them royalty. It made them seals. Still, the new one was doing a convincing impression of someone offended by the concept of being weighed. Mireva stood ankle-deep in the shallow examination pool beneath the sea cliff, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Salt water slapped against the stone troughs. Kelp ropes creaked from the rafters. The morning air smelled of fish oil, storm foam, warm rocks, and the sharp green tonic she used on cracked flippers. Around her, the Royal Sea Beast Healing Bay was already awake. 3 harbor seals barked from the recovery pen. A one-eyed cormorant named Det glared from a beam because he believed everyone owed him shrimp. 2 junior attendants chased a gull that had stolen the wound salve. In the outer cove, a young sea lion sneezed into a copper basin with the force of a small cannon. The extra gray seal ignored all of it. He sat upright on the highest flat rock, broad chest lifted, whiskers dripping, dark eyes fixed on the palace path above the bay. He did not blink when the alarm bells rang again. He did not flinch when the gull dropped the salve jar into a barrel. He merely had worked with sea animals since she was 14. Mireva had worked with sea animals since she was 14. She knew fear. She knew pain. She knew the sly glitter of a seal pretending not to have swallowed a silver button. This was none of those things. This was irritation wearing blubber. You, she told him, pointing with her charcoal stick, are going to be trouble. The seal fixed those dark eyes on her. Slowly, deliberately, he slapped one flipper against the stone. Not hard, not playful. Once. It had the rhythm of a command. Mireva narrowed her eyes. No, he slapped again. She looked at the bucket by her knee, then at his uninjured body, then back at his face. If that means bring better fish, you may prepare for disappointment. The seal's nostrils flared. Mireva wrote beneath the first line, dramatic. Above them, boots hammered down the cliff steps. Captain Odrin of the Coastal Guard appeared at the gate with his cloak half-fastened and his hair wet from sea spray. He was a square man who always looked as if he had been assembled out of spare doors. Today, he looked as if several doors had panicked. Mireva, he called, breath rough. Have you seen anyone come through the lower cove before dawn? The gray seal turned his head toward the captain. The movement was too sharp. Mireva noticed. Odrin did not. He was scanning the pens, the tide pools, the stone ramps, and the low tunnel that led to the outer rocks. No one human, Mireva answered. His Majesty is missing. Every attendant in the bay froze. The young sea lion sneezed again. It was not respectful timing. Odrin closed his eyes for one heartbeat, then opened them. Kadrin had gone to the dawn sea blessing at the Black Reef. His cloak had been found torn near the tide stones. His royal signet chain lay on the sand. Guards had found wolf tracks ending at the tide line, then nothing. Mireva's fingers tightened around the slate. King Kadrin Vare did not vanish. Storms moved around him. Wolves lowered their heads when he passed. Nobles remembered urgent business in other rooms. He was the Alpha King of the coast and high valleys. He had winter gray eyes, black hair, and a reputation for making armed men confess before he finished removing his gloves. He was also, by most accounts, impossible to misplace. The gray seal slid off his rock. He hit the pool with a heavy splash, surged toward the gate, and stopped at the end of the shallow channel. Water streamed from his whiskers. His eyes locked on Captain Odrin. Odrin finally looked at him. "That's a large one." The seal made a low sound from deep in his chest. It was not a normal bark. It was quieter. Worse. One of the attendants stepped behind a barrel. Mireva studied the seal's body. No fear. No confusion. His head was high, his weight angled toward the captain, his small ears pinned flat. Not aggressive in the ordinary way. Not hungry. Not asking to leave. Listening. "He came in with the storm wash," Mireva said. "No wound I can see. Bad temper." The seal's head snapped toward her. Odrin frowned. "Stormwash?" Mireva explained that 3 injured seals had been brought from the Black Reef before sunrise. Then this one had appeared in the intake pool and begun insulting her record keeping with his face. The captain looked from her to the seal. For a moment, something uncertain crossed Odrin's expression. The gray seal stared back, dark eyes hard and furious. Then the captain shook his head. "The council will seal the palace by noon. If anything strange comes through the cove, report it." Mireva glanced at the large seal, who had just placed both flippers on the stone lip of the channel like a lord about to address Parliament. "Define strange." Odrin did not laugh. That told her how bad the morning was. Anything connected to His Majesty. The seal struck the water once with his flipper. Captain Odrin stiffened. Mireva felt it too, though she would not have known how to name it. The air above the pool pressed cold against her skin. The injured harbor seals stopped barking. Even Det the cormorant pulled his neck in and looked less prepared to sue someone for shrimp. The pressure faded almost at once. Odrin swallowed. "That animal," he said slowly, "has an unpleasant stare." Mireva checked the seal's rigid posture. "Most of my patients do." Odrin did not look convinced. "No, that one has a court stare." Mireva looked back at the seal. The seal looked at Odrin as if the captain had finally produced one useful thought. Mireva crossed court stare off the mental list of things she was willing to write on a public slate. The palace guard left in a hurry. The extra seal remained at the gate for a long moment after Odrin vanished up the cliff steps. Then he turned with surprising grace, hauled himself back through the channel, and climbed onto the highest rock again. There, he faced the palace above the cliffs and settled into a posture of wet, silent fury. Mireva watched him. Behind her, the junior attendant Pip whispered, "Do you think we should name him?" The gray seal's head turned slowly. Pip ducked behind the barrel. Mireva considered the broad shoulders, the stern eyes, the refusal of herring, and the way he had reacted to the king's name. "No," she decided. "He will take it personally." The seal blinked once. It looked like approval. "So of course Pip ruined it. What about Lord Whiskers?" The seal launched himself into the pool and hit the water like a dropped boulder. Pip fled. Mireva looked down at the waves soaking her apron. That was a vote against. By midday, the kingdom had become impossible. The palace above the bay roared with messengers. Horns sounded from the seawall. Guards searched the Black Reef, the cliff paths, the lower tunnels, and every room large enough to hide a king. The council sent runners with sealed orders. The priests burned salt incense until the wind pushed it down into the healing bay, where it made 3 seals sneeze and 1 gull faint dramatically. Mireva kept working. Animals did not stop bleeding because kings went missing. She cleaned a torn flipper. She wrapped a sea lion's bitten shoulder. She removed a fish hook from the mouth of an otter who had no sense of consequence. She warmed weak pups under wool cloth and wrote neat notes on slate after slate. The gray seal followed her with his eyes, not constantly. That would have been less unsettling. He watched when the palace bells rang, when guards passed above, when anyone said the words council or regency. He ignored fish unless it was silverfin. He ignored the other seals unless they came too close to the gate. He ignored Pip entirely after the Lord Whiskers incident, which Pip considered a mercy. At one point, a young spotted seal tried to climb onto the high rock. The gray seal stared. The spotted seal slid backward into the pool. Mireva put a hand on her hip. You cannot claim the recovery rock. He did not move. You are not more injured than the others. He remained a majestic lump. Mireva held up her charcoal stick. I can write selfish. The seal's whiskers twitched. She wrote, possessive of upper rock. His gaze dropped to the slate. Then he lifted one flipper and swept a puddle of water over the words. Mireva stared at the ruined note. Pip made a strangled sound from the fish table. The gray seal settled back down. Mireva slowly wiped the slate with her sleeve. Interesting. The seal kept his gaze on the damp stones. That was also interesting. Most seals did not care what she wrote. Some tried to eat the charcoal. One harbor seal named Marmot had once hidden her whole slate under his belly for 3 hours because he enjoyed administrative suffering. None had ever objected to a specific note after reading the shape of the letters. Mireva rewrote the line in smaller script. Possessive of upper rock. Understands insult. This time, she kept the slate under her arm. The gray seal watched the slate for the rest of the afternoon. By sunset, Lord Ruskell came down to the bay. He was one of the Sea Council advisors, tall and narrow, with rings on 3 fingers and a collar too stiff for compassion. Mireva knew him by sight. Everyone knew him by sight. He had the kind of face that made servants remember urgent stains in other rooms. He arrived with 2 scribes and a priest of the Tide Chapel. The gray seal woke before they reached the gate. Mireva noticed because he had not been asleep like the others. No belly-up sprawl, no soft snoring. He had rested with his head angled toward the entrance, one eye open enough to track movement. That was not seal behavior. That was guard behavior. Lord Ruskell wrinkled his nose at the smell of fish tonic. Assistant Quen? My lord? Mireva bowed enough to be correct, not enough to invite conversation. Captain Odran says several sea creatures were recovered near the Black Reef. 4 seals, 1 gull, 1 sea lion, and an otter with a hook problem. The otter in the corner basin made a rude, wet sound. Ruskell ignored it. Were any objects recovered with them? The gray seal's head lifted. Mireva felt the air tighten again. Not enough for Ruskell to notice, perhaps. Enough for every animal in the room to pause. She did not like that Lord Ruskell had asked about objects before asking whether the animals had been hurt. She liked it less that the big seal had reacted. Some torn rope, she answered. Kelp, driftwood, a cracked marker buoy, nothing royal. Ruskell's eyes moved over the pens. And this one? He pointed to the gray seal. The seal stared at the finger. Slowly, the finger lowered. Mireva kept her voice even. Large male, no visible injury, found in the intake pool. It should be sent back to sea. The gray seal made a sound, low, heavy, almost too controlled to be animal. The priest stepped back. Mireva did not. She moved between Ruskell and the rock as if she were only reaching for a bucket. He has not been cleared. Ruskell's nostrils flared. It is a seal. Mireva kept her hands folded. Yes. The advisor pointed toward the outer cove. It belongs in the sea. Not while she lacked answers. Eventually. The gray seal's dark eyes shifted to Mireva's back. She could feel the attention, ridiculous as that seemed. Ruskell leaned closer. His perfume smelled like bitter orange and expensive fear. The kingdom's attention, he said, was needed elsewhere. He would not have servants inventing reasons to keep useless animals under royal care. Mireva thought of the king's torn cloak, the signet chain on the sand, the way this animal had struck water at the word Regency. She thought of the pressure in the air and the slate he had wiped clean. With respect, my lord, animals released too soon often return worse. Then let nature decide. The gray seal moved. He did not lunge or make noise. He simply slid down from the rock, crossed the shallow pool, and placed his body between Mireva and the advisor. Water streamed around him. He was very large up close. Ruskell went still. Mireva looked down at the broad gray head by her knee. The seal did not look at her. He faced Ruskell with the unnerving stillness of a ruler hearing a poor argument. Pip whispered from behind the fish table, "He really hates that lord." "Most people do quietly," Mireva murmured. The seal flicked one ear. Ruskell stepped back with visible effort. "Keep it for one more day, then release it." The advisor left faster than he arrived. The gray seal remained where he was until the gate closed. Then he looked up at Mireva. For one strange moment, the stink of fish and medicine faded beneath the cold, salt wind. Mireva saw exhaustion in those dark eyes, not animal weariness, not illness, a trapped, burning awareness. She had seen that look once before, not in a seal. On the face of King Cadron Vare, 3 months ago, when he had come to the bay after a shipwreck and stood among dead lanterns while fishermen cried. He had looked at the storm-black sea with that same terrible stillness, as if every lost life had lodged under his ribs. Mireva swallowed. The seal blinked. Then he sneezed directly on her boot. The moment died with dignity. She closed her eyes. "Thank you." The seal looked faintly offended by his own nose. That evening, Mireva did not release him. She also did not write court stare. She wrote, "Keep under observation." Then, after a pause, she added, "May understand more than ordinary seal." The gray seal watched her hand. When she lowered the slate, he looked away too quickly. Mireva sat on the edge of the empty examination pool and studied him while dusk turned the cove violet. The healing bay had quieted at last. Pip had gone to fetch supper. The other attendants had retired to the side room. Det the cormorant slept on one leg beside the bait barrel, no doubt dreaming of legal victory. Outside, waves folded over the reef in slow white lines. The large gray seal sat alone on the high rock. He did not join the others. He did not sleep. He faced the palace, where torchlight burned in every window. "You are not from the Black Reef," Mireva said. His whiskers moved, not enough for an answer. She leaned her elbows on her knees. "You have no reef cuts, no rope burns, no bite marks. You were not caught in the storm like the others." The seal stared at the palace. "You also dislike Lord Ruskell." That earned a low rumble. Mireva nodded. "A popular position." He turned his head then, just slightly. Mireva kept her voice calm, because animals trusted calm more than sweetness. "If you are some nobleman's enchanted pet, I should warn you that I cannot afford ransom disputes." The seal's gaze narrowed into a dark slit. Mireva looked at him for a long moment. "You understood that?" He slapped one flipper against the stone. Once. Not command this time. Warning. She sat back. A sensible person would have fetched Captain Odrin. A very sensible person would have fetched a priest, 2 guards, and perhaps a net. Mireva was sensible about wounds, tides, and mold in fish barrels. She was less sensible when faced with a mystery that looked lonely. So she rose, walked to the supply shelf, and took down 3 things: a silverfin, a plain herring, and a small wooden token stamped with the royal wolf crest used to authorize medical feed stores. The seal watched each object. Mireva placed them in a row at the edge of the pool. For science. He ignored the herring. No surprise there. He had been insulting herring all day. He glanced at the silverfin. His nostrils flared once, but he did not take it. Then he looked at the royal token. Everything changed. The seal slid from the rock, entered the pool, and came forward without splash or wasted motion. He stopped before the token. His wet nose lowered until it almost touched the carved wolf crest. For several heartbeats, he did not move. Then he placed one flipper over it. Not clumsy, deliberate, possessive. Mireva's skin prickled. That is not fish. The seal looked up at her. His eyes held fury, humiliation, and a plea so well buried that she nearly missed it. Mireva crouched slowly. "What are you?" The seal opened his mouth. Only a rough bark came out. He flinched, not from pain, from rage. He struck the water hard enough to splash the wall. Mireva did not move. She had learned long ago that panic made injured animals believe the world was confirming their worst ideas. "All right," she said softly. "Not what? Who?" Every line of the seal's body locked. The cove outside sighed against the rocks. Mireva looked at the royal token under his flipper. Then she looked toward the palace bells, now ringing a slower pattern for emergency council. Her mind refused the obvious shape of the thought. It was too large, too absurd, too dangerous. A king could not vanish before dawn and reappear in her healing bay as a seal with expensive fish preferences. But the seal was staring at her as if willing her to stop being sensible. Mireva stood. "No," she told the thought. "Absolutely not." The seal struck the water once. "Do not encourage impossible ideas." He struck it again. She pointed at him. "And do not splash me while I am rejecting reality." The splashing stopped at once. That was the worst part. At midnight, the gray seal escaped. He did not escape well. That was important. Mireva woke to the sound of something large, wet, and furious dragging itself across stone. She slept in the little room beside the tonic shelves during storm weeks, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled faintly of salt and fish smoke. At first, she thought a recovering sea lion had broken a latch. Then she heard the wooden feed crate scrape across the floor. She sat upright. No. The scrape stopped. Mireva lit a lamp. The gray seal froze halfway through the open gate with a fish crate harnessed around his neck by pure bad judgment. He had clearly tried to push the crate aside, wedged himself against it, and chosen to proceed through dignity rather than physics. His head was outside. His body was not. He stared at her. Mireva stared back. Moonlight silvered the wet floor. A trail of water led from the high rock to the gate. The royal token, somehow stolen from her shelf, lay under one flipper. "You," Mireva said, "are attempting treason against my latch." The seal gave her a flat look. "Poorly." His whiskers twitched. She set the lamp down and approached. "If you bite me, I will tell everyone you lost a fight with a crate." That got a reaction. His head lifted. Pride, even in seal form, had weak points. Mireva knelt beside the crate and worked the rope free from under his chest. He smelled of cold water, salt, and the herbal oil she had rubbed on the smaller seals. His body was heavy and warm under the slick fur. When her hand brushed the place behind his shoulder, the seal went rigid. Not animal alarm, embarrassment. Mireva kept her eyes on the knot. "I am a medical attendant. I have touched worse things than a dramatic seal." He exhaled through his nose. It sounded like a man counting to 10 and failing at 8. She loosened the rope. The crate fell away with a hollow thud. The seal immediately tried to continue out the gate. Mireva grabbed the nearest flipper. This was not her wisest decision. The seal stopped. Very slowly, he looked down at her hand. She did not let go. A suspicious seal hauling a royal token uphill would not improve morale while guards searched for a missing king. He looked at the token, then at the cliff steps. Then he looked back at her. "You want the palace!" His silence was almost violent. Mireva's heart beat harder. She released his flipper carefully and picked up the token. "You cannot get there like this." He made that low, controlled sound again. "Especially not like this," she added, gesturing to his entire body. "You are built for water and dramatic lounging. Stairs are not your kingdom." The seal's eyes narrowed. "Do not look at me like I invented anatomy." From the recovery pen, a harbor seal barked sleepily. The gray seal turned his head, ashamed to have witnesses. Mireva should not have found that endearing. She did anyway. "Come back to the pool. In the morning, I will find Captain Odrin." The seal's head snapped back to her. There was urgency in his eyes now. Not panic. Command again. He slapped the stone once with his flipper, then shoved his nose toward the token in her hand. "Not Odrin?" He slapped once. "Ruskell?" The seal's whole body tightened. Mireva went cold. Lord Ruskell is involved. The seal held himself perfectly still. He did not need to. Mireva looked toward the dark palace above. Then she looked at the trapped rage in the seal's face. The royal token lay damp in her palm. The feed crate he had nearly worn as a necklace sat by the gate. All right, she whispered. No Odrin yet. The seal eased by one breath. But no stairs tonight. He gave her a stare. You lost to a crate. He returned to the pool with offended slowness. Mireva followed, carrying the royal token and the lamp. She did not sleep again. By morning, the healing bay had a secret. Secrets were difficult in a place full of animals. Pip noticed the scratch marks by the gate. Det the cormorant noticed the missing bait fish and screamed as if robbed of inheritance. The otter noticed nothing except the chance to steal bandage strips. The harbor seals noticed a mood and began barking, because barking was how they contributed to governance. The gray seal sat on his high rock, dry-eyed and stern, as if he had not spent midnight trapped in a crate. Mireva did not expose him. That was generous. She fed the other seals first. He watched with visible impatience. When she brought his portion, she set down herring. He looked at it, then at her. She waited. He did not eat. Your standards are a burden to the coast. He blinked slowly. Mireva sighed and added one silverfin from the medical stores. He ate that. He left the herring untouched. Mireva wrote, "We'll starve nobly before eating common fish." He lunged for the slate. She lifted it out of reach. You have no legal standing to edit medical records. Pip passed behind her with a bucket. Do seals have legal standing? This one thinks so. The gray seal struck the water. Pip hurried away. Mireva could not blame him. By late morning, she had arranged another test. She waited until the attendants were busy in the outer pen. Then she placed 4 items along the pool edge: a fish, a clean bandage roll, a folded map of the northern coast, a black ribbon torn from the cloak found near the reef, delivered to the bay by mistake with a bundle of wet salvage cloth. She had nearly dropped the ribbon when she saw it. The cloth carried the king's scent faintly beneath salt and storm. Cedar smoke, cold iron, the same scent she remembered from the day he had stood after the shipwreck. The gray seal saw the ribbon. He moved before she could step back. No awkward shuffle, no fish-seeking bounce. He slid into the water and crossed the pool with power that reminded Mireva he was still a strong animal, curse or no curse. He reached the edge and pressed his nose to the ribbon. Then he stopped. His breath changed, slow, shaken. Mireva's teasing died. He touched the torn cloth with one flipper, careful as if it might bruise. His eyes closed for a heartbeat. When he opened them again, the fury was still there, but now grief stood beside it. She understood then that the cloak had been found without him. To the palace, it was evidence. To him, it was proof of how helpless he had become. Mireva sat on the stone edge. I am sorry. The seal kept his attention on the torn cloth. I know you cannot answer. I also know you are not only a seal. His head lifted. Mireva held his gaze. I do not know how that is possible yet. The seal's flipper slid from the ribbon to the map. He pushed it toward her. Chosen. She opened the map. It showed the Black Reef, the old tide chapel, the sea blessing stones, and the cliff path. The seal lowered his nose to one mark near the reef, the dawn altar. Mireva had never been there except to deliver salve to priests with sunburned ears. The place was older than the palace, cut into black stone above the tide. Kings touched the sea beast's charm there every spring, swearing to guard the coast. This year's blessing had been scheduled before sunrise. Mireva looked at the seal. That is where it happened. He tapped the map. The charm? A second tap. Someone changed the charm. The seal's eyes went dark. Mireva exhaled. Lord Ruskell. He made a sound so low the other seals fell quiet. Outside, waves broke hard over the reef. Mireva folded the map. I cannot accuse a sea council lord because a seal pointed at paper. The seal stared. Yes, I understand that you dislike that answer. He slapped the water once. She also understood that he would prefer to solve this by storming the palace in a wet rage. The seal's silence suggested that sounded reasonable. Mireva leaned closer. You lost to a crate. His whiskers flared. We need proof. The seal looked at the map. Then he pushed the black ribbon toward her again. Mireva touched the torn cloth. Salt crystals roughened the edge. Something else clung to it too, pale and powdery, tucked into the weave near the clasp thread. She lifted the ribbon to the light. Old sea salt. Not the clean white salt used in the bay. This was gray, oily, mixed with ground shell and a faint metallic shimmer. Tide charm salt. Mireva had seen it in jars carried by old priests. It was used only in rituals, never on fabric. Oh, she said. The seal watched her face. She looked back at him. Someone salted your cloak before the blessing. His whole body went still. If that salt touched the sea beast's charm when you did, she did not finish. The seal did not need the rest. For the first time since arriving, he looked away from the palace and toward the open water. Mireva saw the thought in the tilt of his head, not a full thought. She could not read him. She could not hear him. But she knew animals under shock, and this one was remembering cold water, sudden skin, lost hands, lost voice. She wanted to touch his head. She did not. He was not hers to soothe like that. Instead, she stood. I am going to the tide chapel. The seal surged forward. She aimed one finger at his wet nose. You are not. He struck the water. No. You are large, recognizable, angry, and currently shaped like evidence. He glared. Also, stairs. His mouth opened, showing strong teeth. Do not hiss at me. I am correct. He shut his mouth. Progress, Mireva decided, was strange. She did not leave at once. The morning tide was turning, and the bay always became difficult when the tide changed. The recovering animals smelled the outer water and remembered they were wild. The harbor seals became loud. The otter became philosophical about theft. The young sea lion tried to convince every latch that it had been installed by cowards. The gray seal remained by the map. He watched Mireva divide feed into separate buckets. He watched Pip clean the small wounds on a spotted pup. He watched Det, the cormorant, steal a strip of drying kelp and then pretend the kelp had followed him voluntarily. He watched too much. Ordinary seals watched food, hands, exits, and each other. This one watched systems. He watched the order of buckets. He watched which attendant was tired. He watched which gate latch stuck when the wind pushed against it. At first, Mireva told herself that intelligence in animals could look like strategy if a person was tired enough. She had once seen a sea lion unscrew the lid from a fish barrel. She had known a gull who could identify the assistant cook by ankle shape. The coast bred clever creatures, mostly because stupid creatures did not survive gulls. Then Pip slipped. He was carrying warm broth for the smallest pup, a thin little thing with a healing bite near its shoulder. His boot hit spilled tonic. The bowl flew from his hands. Hot broth arsed toward the pup's bedding. The gray seal moved before Mireva did. He launched from the edge of the pool, hit the wet stones, and slammed his shoulder into the low feed table. The table jolted sideways. The broth struck the table leg instead of the pup, splashing harmlessly across stone. Pip landed on his backside. The pup squeaked. The gray seal lay half out of the pool, breathing hard and looking furious at everyone involved. Mireva knelt at once. Did you hurt yourself? He ignored her hand and shoved his nose toward the pup. She checked the pup first. No burn. No new injury. Only outrage and broth on one whisker. When Mireva turned back, the large seal was trying to haul himself into the water as if nothing had happened. The movement was too stiff. His left side had struck the table hard. She blocked him with one knee. No. His whole body went rigid. She pointed to the examination mat. You hit the table. You get checked. His eyes said several things. None of them were printable on a medical slate. Mareva had no language from him, no words, no secret voice in her mind. But she had handled injured animals long enough to read resistance by muscle, breath, and refusal. He did not fear pain. He feared being handled while witnesses watched. That was not a seal problem. That was a king problem. She looked over her shoulder. Pip had already turned around with theatrical interest in the wall. Det, less helpful, leaned from his beam with open delight. Mireva pointed at the cormorant. You too. Det gave a tiny offended croak and looked away. Only then did the gray seal allow her to examine his side. Allow was generous. He suffered it with the expression of a ruler accepting a terrible treaty. Mireva found no broken rib, only bruising under the thick fur. When her fingers pressed the sore place, his whiskers drew tight and his eyes fixed on the far wall. No bark, no snap, no attempt to bite. He endured in silence because the pup was watching. Mireva's throat tightened before she could stop it. You protected him, she said quietly. The seal's gaze shifted to the pup, then away. He nudged the nearest fish bucket with one flipper. The bucket slid toward the pup's bedding. Mireva studied him. You are pretending that was about feed distribution. He would not meet her eyes. Poorly. His flipper slapped the stone once, softer than usual. She did not write that on the slate. Some truths did not need to become evidence. By noon, the Bey received official papers from the palace. A runner brought them in a waxed tube. He announced that every royal department must prepare an inventory in case emergency council control began at sundown. Then, he nearly tripped over the otter. The papers were meant for Master Hollis, the Bey's absent senior keeper. Hollis had gone north 3 days ago to inspect a whale stranding and had not returned. That left Mireva with the tube. It also left the gray seal with an immediate opinion. He slid from the recovery pool and planted himself between her and the runner. The runner, a thin boy with ink on his cuffs, stared down at him. Does it bite? Mireva looked at the seal. The seal looked at the runner. The answer depended on politics. Only poor judgment, she said. The runner placed the tube on the nearest table and retreated. Mireva opened the papers under the awning. Rain had started again, fine and cold, making little silver circles on the pools. The first page listed routine stores: fish oil, bandage linen, salt tonic, warming wool. The second page listed proposed emergency transfer of coastal assets to the Sea Council. The gray seal dragged himself closer. Mireva angled the paper away from Spray. This is not for you. He set his chin on the table edge. His eyes moved across the page, not like a reading animal, like a man who had read too many bad documents and expected betrayal in the third paragraph. Mireva felt foolish for thinking it. Then his nose touched one line. Emergency authority over coastal healing assets shall be transferred to Lord Ruskell, pending royal recovery. The seal's breath changed. He did not bark or slap the table. Instead, he lowered his head until his nose almost touched the ink, and his whole body went still. The other animals felt it. The spotted pup stopped chewing. The sea lion stopped worrying the latch. Even Det stepped backward on the beam. Cold prickled along Mireva's arms. The pressure that came from him was not loud. It was not visible. It pressed through the bay like a storm, deciding whether to break. No, she said under her breath. Not here. The seal's eyes lifted to hers. She did not know why she said it that way. Not to an animal, not to a king. To both, perhaps. There are injured patients in this room. His nostrils flared. The pressure eased by degrees. Mireva exhaled slowly. She had asked a cursed alpha king in seal form not to frighten the patients, and he had obeyed. That should have been impossible. It was also very useful. She rolled the papers and tucked them into her apron. You understand paperwork, he stared. My condolences. His whiskers twitched once. Not a smile. Seals did not smile. Still, something in his face changed, and the air in the bay became less sharp. That was when the otter opened the bandaged chest and emerged with 3 stolen rolls on its head, like a priest of nonsense. The gray seal looked at it. Mireva studied the ridiculous sight. Pip, returning with clean water, whispered, "Should I stop him?" The otter fell over. Mireva rubbed her forehead. "Let him have one. He has committed to the performance." The gray seal's mouth opened a fraction. A rough breath came out. It was not quite laughter. It was close enough that Mireva had to look away. The next test happened by accident. Captain Odrin sent a sealed map to the bay through a guard who did not know why a sea beast healer needed military routes. The map showed search grids along the Black Reef and the Cliff Coast. Mireva meant to hide it in the feed ledger. The gray seal saw the red search marks first. He moved across the whetstone with purpose, shoved the empty herring bucket aside, and lowered his nose to the map. His nostrils flared at one cove. Then he pushed the map with his muzzle until the northern inlet aligned with the edge of the table. Mireva watched, motionless. The inlet was not on the official search path. It was a narrow cut in the reef, used mostly by smugglers and stubborn fishermen. It also connected by an old drainage tunnel to the lower cliff storage rooms. If someone had prepared the curse, someone could have escaped that way after the dawn rite. "You know that route." The seal kept his nose near the map. He pushed the map again, harder. Mireva weighted the corner with a tonic jar. "I see it." He pushed a loose shell across the map until it landed on the inlet. His flipper trembled with effort. The bruised side was hurting him. He ignored it. Mireva placed a hand near the flipper, not touching. Enough. He resisted for one breath longer. Then he withdrew. She looked at the shell, the map, and the creature before her. The obvious thought returned, larger now and no easier to accept. If he was only a seal, then the coast had produced a military cartographer with whiskers. If he was not only a seal, then the kingdom's missing Alpha King had just corrected a search grid from a fish table. An otter wore stolen bandages in the corner while it happened. Mireva sat down on an overturned bucket. "This is going to be a very difficult report." The seal lowered his head onto his flippers. For the first time, he looked tired enough to be ordinary. She let him rest. The bay moved around them in its damp, noisy rhythm. Rain tapped the awning. Fish scales flashed in buckets. Pip hummed badly while sweeping. The sea lion finally defeated the latch and looked disappointed when no one admired him. Mireva watched the gray seal breathe. She had been trained to measure survival in little things. A pup swallowing milk, a gull lifting one wing, a wounded seal choosing sleep instead of panic. This creature, whatever his true shape, had spent the day bleeding dignity from 100 small cuts. He had lost his hands. He had lost his voice. He had lost the ability to make anyone believe him. Yet he still noticed hot broth, bad law, hidden routes, weak pups, and danger near doors. That was when Mireva stopped asking whether he could be the king. She began asking how to bring him back. She left Pip in charge of the bay with clear instructions. Do not release the gray seal. Feed him only silverfin if he became impossible. Never call him Lord Whiskers again unless Pip wished to be haunted. Pip looked at the seal. The seal looked back. Understood, Pip said. The tide chapel sat halfway up the cliff, where sea wind carved every prayer thin before it reached the ceiling. Its walls were whitewashed stone, its roof tiled in blue slate, its floor always damp no matter the weather. Shell charms hung from the rafters and clicked together softly like teeth. Mireva entered through the service door with a basket of clean cloths. Servants survived by carrying useful objects. A woman with a basket was invisible. A woman without one was suspicious. Inside, 3 junior priests argued over emergency rites for a missing king. None noticed her. The old sea beast charm lay on a velvet cloth near the altar. It was smaller than she expected, a carved piece of dark hide hardened by age and set in a silver frame. The shape was not wolf, not seal, but something between, a creature of coast and fang. It smelled faintly of salt, smoke, and old oil. Mireva moved to replace towels by the basin. Lord Ruskell's voice came from the side chamber. She froze behind a screen. Ruskell insisted that the regency vote had to happen before sundown. The coast, according to him, could not wait for a king who might be drowned. A priest answered, nervous and low. Tradition requires 3 days. Tradition did not find his body. Mireva's hands tightened around the folded towel. Ruskell continued with silky impatience. He claimed the sea blessing had failed, the charm had rejected Kadrin, and the council must answer the tide, if the Alpha King could not. The priest murmured something she could not catch. No one touches the charm until the vote, Ruskell snapped. Footsteps approached. Mireva grabbed the basin towel, dipped it in water, and began wiping salt residue from the floor with excessive devotion. Lord Ruskell emerged from the side chamber. His rings flashed in the chapel light. One held a dark blue stone with a silver fleck at its center. Tide glass. Rare. Used in old coastal rites. He paused when he saw her. You. Mireva looked up as if surprised. My lord. Ruskell's gaze dropped to the cloths in her basket. Why are you here? She lifted the basket slightly. The bay cloths, my lord. The priests requested dry ones. His mouth tightened. Do not linger. Mireva lowered her eyes. No, my lord. He walked past. As he did, the hem of his sleeve brushed the basin. A few grains of gray salt fell from the cuff and landed on the wet stone. Mireva did not look at them until he left. Then she collected them in the corner of the towel. The grains shimmered faintly. Old tide salt. Proof, perhaps. Not enough. She needed the charm. Unfortunately, the charm was guarded by priests, tradition, and a very awake acolyte who had decided the altar needed dusting every 9 seconds. Mireva waited. Waiting was a skill learned from seals. Humans thought seals were lazy because they lay still for hours. Mireva knew better. Seals could wait out gulls, tides, fishermen, and foolish attendants who thought buckets were safe. Patience was hunting with better posture. After half an hour, the priests were summoned to the upper chapel. The acolyte followed, carrying too many candles. Mireva crossed to the altar and lifted the charm. The underside had been scratched. New marks cut through the old hide in a tight spiral. They were filled with gray salt and something darker, almost like ink. She could not read old runes, but she knew an infected wound when she saw one. This charm had been made to hold one meaning and forced to carry another. A cold feeling slid over her hands. For one breath, she smelled deep water. Then someone cleared his throat behind her. Mireva turned. Captain Odrin stood by the chapel door. He looked at the charm in her hand, then at her face. I hope, he said carefully, there is a very good reason. Mireva considered several lies. All were too small for the morning. I think His Majesty is alive. Odrin went rigid. Mireva held up the charm. And I think Lord Ruskell knows exactly where he is. The captain stepped inside and shut the door. In the healing bay, the gray seal behaved badly. Pip later described the event with the hollow voice of a young man who had seen too much wet authority. First, the seal refused lunch. Then he shoved the herring bucket into the recovery pen, where the smaller seals began a riot. Then he took the royal token from the shelf again, dragged it to the gate, and slapped the stone until Det the cormorant started screaming along in solidarity. When a guard came to ask about the noise, the gray seal threw a fish at him. Not accidentally. Pip was firm about that. The fish hit the guard's chest, slid down his armor, and left a shining trail of oil. By the time Mireva returned with Captain Odrin, the bay smelled like rebellion and mackerel. The gray seal sat in the middle of the main pool, breathing hard, royal token under one flipper, wet whiskers bristling. Smaller seals watched him from safe corners. The otter had stolen 3 bandages during the confusion and looked inspired. Odrin stopped at the pool edge. The seal looked at him. The captain's face changed. It was not recognition exactly. Recognition would have been too easy. It was the expression of a loyal man whose instincts had just found a familiar shape under a ridiculous surface. "Your Majesty?" Odrin whispered. The gray seal closed his eyes. Mireva heard the exhaustion in that tiny movement. Then he opened them and slapped the stone once. Captain Odrin turned pale. Pip dropped the empty fish bucket. It landed on his foot. No one helped him for 3 seconds. "We are not announcing this yet," Mireva said. Odrin looked at her as if the world had rolled sideways. "The Alpha King is a seal." The seal made a low sound. Mireva pointed at the captain. "Do not say it like that." Odrin swallowed. "How should I say it?" "Quietly." Pip raised a trembling hand. "Should I still not call him Lord Whiskers?" The gray seal turned. Pip lowered his hand. "Never mind." Mireva placed the scratched charm on the stone edge. The seal moved toward it but stopped before touching. His body tightened as if the thing hurt from a distance. Odrin knelt. "Ruskil?" The seal slapped the stone once. The captain's jaw hardened. Mireva unwrapped the towel with the gray salt and explained where she had found it. The same salt had been packed into the cuts on the charm. Odrin's voice lowered. "Why transform him? Why not kill him?" The seal's eyes sharpened. Mireva glanced at him, then answered through the logic. A missing king created a legal pause. A dead king created succession law, witnesses, rights, and claims. A vanished king let the council vote emergency powers. The gray seal watched her with unsettling intensity. She felt heat rise in her face. Mireva added that nobles talked freely when they thought fish smell protected them from being overheard. Odrin gave one grim nod. "The regency vote is at sundown." The seal struck the water hard. "Yes," Mireva told him. "We know you object." His stare became withering. She folded her arms. "You cannot attend council in your current condition." The seal lifted his head. Odrin looked from seal to woman. "He wants to. Of course he wants to." He also wanted to climb cliff stairs with a feed crate around his neck. The captain paused. "What?" The gray seal sank lower in the water. Mireva decided not to elaborate. Some medical details were private. Odrin rubbed a hand over his face. "Can the curse be broken?" Mireva looked at the charm. She did not know yet, but old tide charms needed witnesses. The marks had changed the oath. They needed the original wording. The priests would know. "The priests are afraid of Ruskell." The seal made a contemptuous sound. "Also," Mireva added, "they may not believe that the king is the large, angry seal in my pool." Odrin glanced at the pool. The seal gave him a stare that could have stripped paint from a ship. "I believe it," the captain said. That afternoon, they built a plan from poor materials. Captain Odrin would delay the regency vote by claiming new evidence from the reef. Pip would distract the junior priests by reporting an outbreak of shell mites in the chapel linens. There were no shell mites, but priests feared them more than taxes. Mireva would take the gray seal to the old tide archive beneath the chapel, where the original sea blessing words might be stored. The largest problem was moving the king. Not politically, physically. The healing bay had a low-wheeled stretcher, used for injured sea lions. It was sturdy, salt-stained, and deeply undignified. The gray seal looked at it as if someone had offered him a coffin made of bad manners. Mireva patted the stretcher. "Your transport, Your Majesty." The seal remained stubbornly planted. Odrin looked at the cliff path. "We could use a covered cart." Mireva explained that the wheels were too narrow for the lower tunnel. Also, someone would ask why they were moving a covered cart into the tide archive. Pip, eager to redeem himself, held up a tarpaulin. "We could say he is a barrel." The gray seal's head turned. Pip lowered the tarpaulin. "A very important barrel?" he tried. Mireva took the tarpaulin away from him. "No one is calling the Alpha King a barrel." The seal gave her a long, offended stare. She looked back. "I have been very respectful considering the crate incident." Odrin coughed. The seal hauled himself onto the stretcher with the stiff pride of a ruler signing a treaty under protest. His body flopped heavily at the end, and one flipper slid off the side. Mireva adjusted it. He stiffened from whiskers to tail. Your flipper was dragging. His eyes told her that kings did not have flippers. Today you do. Odrin turned away, shoulders shaking once. The seal noticed. The captain became a statue. Moving through the lower tunnel took 20 minutes, 4 pauses, 2 near disasters, and 1 argument over whether a seal could glare harder in darkness. The tunnel ran from the healing bay under the cliff to the old Tide Chapel storage rooms. It smelled of damp stone, salt rot, and candle smoke. Water dripped from the ceiling. The stretcher wheels squeaked like guilty mice. Mireva pushed from the back, while Odrin guided the front. The seal maintained a severe expression. At the steepest section, the stretcher rolled backward 1 inch. The seal's eyes flashed wide. Mireva dug her boots into the stone. I have you. The words came out before she thought about them. The stretcher stopped. The tunnel went quiet except for dripping water. The seal did not turn his head. He could not easily, from that angle. But his body eased. Just enough. Mireva felt the moment like a warm hand under the ribs. Then Det the cormorant, who had followed them without permission, landed on the stretcher handle and screamed. The seal jerked. Odran swore. Mireva nearly lost the wheels. Det flapped away, offended that no one appreciated security assistance. The Alpha King, trapped in seal form on a squeaking stretcher under his own chapel, closed his eyes with the patience of a man reconsidering all coastal bird law. Mireva laughed. She tried not to. She failed. The sound echoed down the tunnel. Odran stared at her. The seal opened one eye. I am sorry, she managed. This is serious. The seal's stare suggested she had noticed late. That only made it worse. By the time they reached the Tide Archive, even Odran was quietly smiling. The Tide Archive was not grand. It was a low stone room under the chapel, lined with shelves, sealed jars, old rope, and carved shells. Centuries of coastal kings had placed vows here. Most were practical. Fishing rights, storm taxes, harbor repairs, sea beast protections. Royal families loved to decorate duty with poetry, but in the end, people needed safe boats and dry grain. Mireva liked that. The seal did too, perhaps. He lifted his head from the stretcher and studied the shelves with alert focus. Odrin lit 3 lamps. Mireva searched for the oldest sea blessing records. The first shelf held recent copies, all neat and useless. The second held priestly commentaries, which were worse. The third held a jar labeled Found Under East Drain, possibly important. She opened that one first. Inside were old shells, each etched with tiny lines of script. Mireva could not read all of them, but she recognized the pattern from the scratched charm. Odrin leaned over her shoulder. Can you read it? Some. My grandmother taught shore marks, not priest script. A low sound left the seal. Mireva looked back. He had shifted on the stretcher and was pointing his nose toward a lower shelf. Odrin lifted a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside lay a cracked slate. The seal watched so intensely that Mireva felt the room narrow around it. She cleaned the slate with her sleeve. Old words appeared beneath salt dust. Not all. Enough. She read slowly. The king touches hide not to wear it, but to guard those who wear skin not his own. Odrin bent closer. Mireva continued. The coast answers not to crown alone, but to witness, care, and name. The seal grew very still. Her head lifted. His eyes were on her, not the slate. Witness, care, and name, she repeated. Odrin's brow tightened. What does that mean for the curse? Mireva thought of the scratched charm, the altered oath, the way the new marks had twisted protection into imprisonment. Ruskell had changed the meaning. The old rite said the king protected other skins. The curse had made him wear one. Odrin looked grim. How do we reverse it? Mireva read the last line on the slate. Let the named be known beneath the skin, and let the witness choose the truth over shape. The captain stared. That sounds like priest language. It is. The seal made a low, annoyed sound. He agrees, Mireva said. Then she caught herself. She did not know if he agreed. She knew only that the sound fit annoyance. She knew the angle of his head, the tension in his neck, the little flare of nostrils that appeared whenever someone said something stupid. She knew him. Not as a king. Not yet as a man. As this trapped, furious, proud creature who refused herring and guarded gates and pushed fish toward weaker animals when he thought no one was looking. Mireva touched the slate. Mireva said the curse might require someone to identify him at the altar. Not by crown, by behavior, by what remained when shape was wrong. Odrin looked toward the seal. The seal looked away first. Embarrassment again. Mireva found that dangerously tender. Above them, a bell rang. Not the search bell. Council summons. Odrin swore under his breath. Ruskell moved the vote earlier. The seal tried to roll off the stretcher. Mireva caught his shoulder with both hands. No. No. His glare could have cracked chapel stone. You cannot crash a council meeting from a sea lion stretcher. Odrin looked as if he was considering whether that was entirely true. Mireva pointed at him too. Do not help that idea. The captain straightened. We need the altar. The original rite happened there. Mireva looked toward the upper passage. And we need Ruskell's altered charm. Odrin's jaw set. It is in the chapel, which meant witnesses, priests, and locks. Guarded. Odrin smiled without humor. Not for long. The captain left through the upper passage to gather loyal guards. Mireva stayed in the archive with the seal, the old slate, and the dripping ceiling. For a few minutes, neither moved. Then the seal gave a soft huff. Mireva looked at him. Are you impatient or apologizing? He blinked. That was not clear. His whiskers gave one sharp twitch. She sat on a crate beside the stretcher. You know, when this is over, if this is what I think it is, you will have a problem. The seal's gaze sharpened. Everyone in this bay has seen you on a stretcher. He closed his eyes. Pip saw the crate. The seal covered his nose with one flipper. It was the most human gesture he had made. Mireva's heart did something foolish. I won't tell, she said. His flipper lowered. She looked down at her hands, rough from salt and tonic. Not because you are king, because no one should be remembered only by their worst morning. The seal watched her. The room felt too quiet. Then Det screamed from the tunnel again. Mireva rose from the crate. That bird is going to die of being himself. The seal gave a rough breath. It might have been pain. It might have been laughter with no human throat to carry it. They moved before sundown. Odrin returned with 4 guards who looked loyal, frightened, and deeply unprepared for transporting their sovereign as a seal through a service passage. To their credit, none laughed. One did stare too long at the flippers and had to be elbowed by the captain. Mireva wrapped the old slate in cloth and tucked it against her chest. The altered charm had been taken from the chapel and carried to the dawn altar for the emergency vote. Ruskell wanted the council to declare the sea blessing failed in Kadron's absence. He would use the charm as proof. He would stand before the same stones where he had cursed the king and claim authority from the tide. It was arrogant. It was also convenient. We have one chance, Odrin said. The seal slapped the stretcher. Mireva adjusted the cloth over the wheels. Yes, Your Majesty, I am aware you dislike the obvious. The nearest guard made a choking sound. Odrin stared straight ahead. They took the lower tunnel to the black reef path. Wind hit them as they emerged, sharp with spray and evening cold. The sea stretched below in dark green plates. Gulls wheeled over the cliffs. Torches burned at the dawn altar, where counselors had gathered in a half-circle around the carved tide stones. Ruskell stood before them in a blue-black cloak. The altered charm hung from his hand. Even from a distance, the gray seal reacted. His body tensed so hard the stretcher creaked. Mireva put one hand near his shoulder, not touching at first. Wait, he trembled. Not fear this time. Restraint. She rested her palm lightly on his slick fur. Wait, she repeated. The seal stilled under her hand. One of the guards saw it and stared at her with new confusion. Mireva ignored him. There was no time to explain the problem. The Alpha King, if that was truly who he was, had become easier to manage than some sea lions once one stopped insulting him with herring. At the altar, Ruskell raised his voice. The coast cannot be leaderless. His Majesty vanished during the sea blessing. Until he is found, authority must pass to the Sea Council for protection of harbor, fleet, and border. Murmurs moved through the gathered nobles. Priests stood stiffly near the tide stones. Captain Odrin's loyal guards slipped around the edges, blocking the path down. Ruskell lifted the charm. The tide did not return him. The seal made a sound that began low and became a roar. Every head turned. It was difficult, later, for Mireva to decide which part of the entrance was least dignified. The wheeled stretcher rattling over uneven stone did not help. The tarpaulin slipping off halfway did not help. Det the cormorant, who had followed them and landed on a torch bracket like a witness for the prosecution, helped least of all. But the gray seal raised his head as he came into view, and somehow the absurdity did not erase the force of him. Water shone on his whiskers, his dark eyes fixed on Ruskell. The air turned cold enough that torch flames bent inward. Several nobles stepped back. Ruskell's face went blank. That was when Mireva knew, not suspected, knew. The Lord recognized him. Mireva stepped forward before courage could become a debate. The tide did return him, she called. Her voice was not grand. It was a bay worker's voice, used to shouting over gulls, waves, and animals who thought medicine was a personal attack. It carried. Ruskell recovered quickly. Remove that animal! The seal struck the stretcher with one flipper. The sound cracked across the altar stones. No one moved. Mireva held up the old slate and named the evidence. The charm had been changed. Someone had cut a skin-binding curse into it and packed the marks with old tide salt. The priests began whispering. Ruskell's eyes flashed. This is nonsense from a servant who smells of fish. Det shrieked from the torch bracket. Mireva did not look at the bird, though she appreciated the tone. I do smell of fish, she agreed. That is why everyone forgets to stop talking around me. A few guards shifted. Ruskell's mouth tightened. Mireva pointed to his hand and laid out the proof. His ring held tide glass. His sleeve had carried the same gray salt found in the altered charm. He had asked the Bey about objects before he asked about injuries. He had wanted the seal released before anyone noticed what he was. The seal's gaze stayed on Ruskell. Ruskell laughed. It was a thin sound, and the wind disliked it. What he was! It is a seal! Mireva turned to the stretcher. The seal's gaze came back to her. For one moment, the altar, the council, and the cold sea vanished from her attention. She saw only the creature she had tended, the proud set of his head, the way he guarded entrances, the way he reacted to maps and titles, to cruelty and fear, the way he had pushed the royal token under his flipper, not like a toy, but like an identity. She did not have magic. She had observation. She had care. She had the certainty that living things showed truth when no one thought they could. Mireva opened the slate and read the old words. Let the named be known beneath the skin, and let the witness choose the truth over shape. The wind moved hard across the altar. The seal's eyes did not leave hers. Mireva lowered the slate. Mireva named him clearly enough for the sea to hear. This was Cadron Vare. Not because he wore a crown, Not because he could command anyone there, because he had spent 2 days trapped in a body no one respected. He had still guarded doors, watched threats, protected the weak, refused bad food with unreasonable royal standards, and tried to stop Lord Ruskell from taking power. The gray seal went very still. Behind her, Captain Odrin bowed his head. Mareva stepped closer to the stretcher and continued with the details no court record would have honored. He was proud, impatient, difficult, and terrible at accepting help. He had also pushed his best fish to an injured pup when he thought no one saw. The seal's eyes widened before he could hide it. Mareva almost smiled. Yes, I saw. Something in the altered charm began to hiss. Ruskell lunged forward. Stop her. Odrin caught his arm. The priests backed away from the charm as gray salt leaked from the scratched lines. The tide below the altar surged, though the moon had not risen. Mireva held the seal's gaze and spoke the name again. Cadron Veer. A broken sound rose from the seal. Not a bark, not a roar. A broken human note trapped inside an animal throat. Mireva's chest hurt. I witness you, she said. I choose the truth over shape. The charm split. Salt burst from the cuts in a gray cloud. The sea wind tore it apart. Light flashed across the tide stones, pale as moon water. The stretcher lurched. Guards shouted. Det flapped into the air with offended alarm. Mireva reached for the seal. Her hand met fur, then cold light, then skin. The seal shape collapsed inward like water, folding through a ring. A man lay on the stretcher. A very large, very naked man. For half a heartbeat, the entire council forgot politics. Mireva moved first. She seized the tarpaulin and threw it over him. King Cadron Vare opened his eyes. They were winter gray, furious, exhausted, and painfully human. He looked at Mireva, then at the tarpaulin, then at the council. His voice came out rough, low, and lethal. Lord Ruskell! Ruskell tried to pull free. Odrin tightened his grip. The restored Alpha King slowly sat up with the tarpaulin clutched around his shoulders and seawater dripping from his black hair. He should have looked ridiculous. He did, a little. The tarpaulin had a faded painted warning on one corner that read, Property of West Cove Fish Stores. No one laughed. Not even Det. Cadron's gaze moved over the council. Anyone who votes before hearing Captain Odrin's evidence may consider that vote a confession. Several nobles stepped away from Ruskell at once. Mireva breathed for the first time in what felt like a week. Then Cadron looked back at her. His expression changed. Not softened, exactly. He did not seem built for softness in public. But the cold command eased enough for something quieter to show. Mireva Quen. Her name in his human voice nearly undid her. She managed to bow. Your Majesty. His mouth tightened at the title. Then his eyes dropped to the stretcher, to the tarpaulin, to the damp trail he had left across the altar. Something like horror crossed his face. Mireva leaned closer and kept her voice low. No one will hear about the crate from me. Cadron closed his eyes. Captain Odrin made a sound that might have been a cough. Det gave a furious scream from the beam. The king opened his eyes again and looked at the bird. That bird, he said, is under arrest. Det flew away. The kingdom did not recover all at once. Ruskell was arrested before moonrise, along with 2 priests, a harbor clerk, and one very nervous scribe who confessed to everything after Odrin placed the cracked charm on the table. The regency vote dissolved into excuses. The Tide Chapel was sealed for review. The Sea Council discovered urgent loyalty. Cadron was taken to the palace by a private path. He refused a litter. He did accept a cloak. Mireva returned to the healing bay with Pip, 4 guards, and an empty sea lion stretcher that everyone avoided mentioning. The real seals were unimpressed by politics. Marmot had stolen the slate. The injured pup needed feeding. The otter had escaped its basin and hidden inside the clean bandaged chest. Det returned after sunset, landing on the roof beam with the smug air of a bird who had evaded royal arrest. Mireva worked until her hands ached. Only when the moon rose over the cove did she sit on the high rock where the gray seal had claimed his brief, damp throne. The rock was still warm from the day. The bay smelled of salt, fish, tonic, and ordinary work. Waves moved in and out of the intake pool. Somewhere above, the palace was probably tearing itself apart with explanations. Mireva leaned back on her palms. She should have felt proud. She mostly felt tired, also worried. Not about Ruskell. Men like him always had friends, but Kadrin had returned with the kind of fury that made friends reconsider their schedules. She worried about what came after. For 2 days, she had known a seal, a furious, proud, ridiculous seal who could not speak and had still somehow become a person in the space between her observations. Now, he was a king again. Kings belonged to chambers, councils, bloodlines, and histories. Low attendants belonged to the bay. That was how the world stayed organized. A wet fish landed beside her boot. Mireva looked down. Det stared from the beam. If that is an apology, it is poor. The bird blinked. If that is evidence, I am off duty. Det looked toward the gate. Mireva followed his gaze. King Kadrin stood at the entrance to the healing bay. He wore a dark cloak over plain clothes. His hair was still damp. No crown, no council chain, no guards visible, though Mireva doubted Odrin had let him come completely alone. He looked too tall for the gate, too severe for the fish barrels, and too human for the high rock that had held his seal body all morning. Mireva stood too quickly. Her boot slipped. Kadrin moved. He crossed the distance with wolf speed and caught her elbow before she could fall into the pool. For one breath, his hand was warm around her arm. Then he released her at once. Forgive me. The apology was so formal that she almost laughed. I have survived worse than being steadied, Your Majesty. His gaze flicked toward the feed crate near the gate. Mireva followed it. The crate had been repaired and placed upright. Neither of them spoke. Then she said, most worse things. Kadrin's eyes narrowed. But there was no anger in it, only a tired spark that looked suspiciously like humor. I came to thank you, he said. Mireva folded her hands because she did not know what else to do with them. You already did by not arresting me for unauthorized king transport. His eyes moved briefly toward the empty stretcher. I considered several charges. That startled her. Against me? Kadrin's expression remained solemn, against the stretcher. She smiled before she could stop herself. Kadrin looked at the smile the way he had once looked at the royal token, carefully, as if it mattered. The bay went quiet around them. Not completely. It was never completely quiet. Water sighed, a seal snored, Det clicked his beak with legal interest. But the world seemed to give them a small pocket of salt air and moonlight. Kadrin turned toward the main pool. I remember all of it. Mireva's smile faded. The fish, he said. The slate. The examination. The crate. Mireva's mouth twitched. Especially unfortunate. His gaze sharpened. The name Lord Whiskers. She nodded with grave sympathy. Pip regrets that. Kadrin's answer came at once. He should. Mireva watched his profile. Without the crown, his face looked younger and more tired. The sharp lines remained, but now she knew what helpless fury had looked like beneath them. She knew the shape of his pride when it had no words. I am sorry, she said. Kadrin looked at her. For what? For the parts where I treated you like an animal. He was silent long enough that she feared she had said too much. Then his voice lowered. You treated me better than most people treat kings. Her throat tightened. He looked toward the recovery pen, where the injured pup slept under wool. You made rules. You kept me warm. You watched when I could not speak. You did not turn my helplessness into entertainment. Mireva thought of laughing in the tunnel. Kadrin's mouth almost moved. Mostly. Mireva remembered the tunnel and the bird's terrible timing. The bird landed on your stretcher. His face darkened. I remember. She spread one hand. No one could be expected to remain solemn. Kadrin's voice stayed dry. Odrin did. That was unfair to ordinary people. Odrin is built from old doors. The king stared at her. Then he laughed. It was quiet, brief, and startlingly rough, like a sound pulled from a locked room. Det screamed from the beam. Kadrin looked up. Still under arrest. The bird shuffled one step away. Mireva's heart felt too large for her ribs. Kadrin reached inside his cloak and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. He handed it to her. Mireva unfolded the cloth. Inside lay a seal token carved from dark driftwood. Not a sea animal, a royal mark. The wolf crest on one side, the tide mark on the other. It was the kind of badge given to senior keepers, harbor masters, and officials whose word could open gates. She stared at it. Your Majesty, I am a bay attendant. Kadrin did not take the token back. You are the only person in the kingdom who identified its king by his behavior while he was shaped like a seal. She looked at the polished driftwood. That is not a traditional qualification. His answer was absolute. It is now. She finally looked up. His face was serious. Of course it was. Kadrin did not know how to offer life-changing honors casually. He looked as if he were declaring war on her unemployment. Kadrin told her the Royal Sea Beast Healing Bay would be separated from council oversight. She would be its chief keeper. No lord would order an animal released from her care again. Mireva could not speak. Her hands closed around the driftwood token. Kadrin watched her, and uncertainty crossed his face for the first time since he had arrived as a man. If you do not want the post, refuse it. She found her voice. I want it. His shoulders eased. Good. Mireva still held the token carefully. But if this is because I saw you as a seal? Kadrin stopped that thought before it could grow. It is because you saw me, he corrected. The shape was the least dignified detail. Mireva looked at the pool. It was a very strong detail. Mireva. She pressed her lips together. Sorry. He did not look offended. That was dangerous. He stepped closer, stopping with enough space between them that she could choose not to lean in. He had learned that from the bay, perhaps. Animals trusted space. So did people who had never been offered much. There is another reason I came. Her fingers tightened around the token. Kadrin looked at her with the same focus he had given the world from the high rock. When he could not command, she had still listened. When he could not explain, she had still paid attention. When he had been furious, ridiculous, and useless to his own crown, she had not abandoned him to men who wanted advantage. Mireva had no joke ready. That felt unsafe. He continued more quietly. He did not yet know how to stand near her without bringing the palace with him. He intended to learn, if she allowed it. The tide washed softly through the intake pool. Mireva looked at the king. She saw the man. She also saw the seal who had guarded the gate, refused herring, lost to a crate, and pushed his best fish to a weaker pup. You may come to the bay, she said, not as an inspection. His eyes warmed by a fraction. No. She counted the terms on her fingers. Not to issue orders. He accepted that too. No. She lifted a final finger. And if you frighten the patients, I will make you wait outside. Kadrin inclined his head. Fair. Det let out another offended shriek. Mireva glanced up. He thinks that should include birds. He is still under arrest. You cannot arrest every bird that saw you on a stretcher. Kadrin's expression darkened. How many? Mireva looked toward the rafters, where 3 gulls had quietly gathered beside Det. Kadrin followed her gaze. For a moment, the Alpha King of the Coast stood in moonlight, freshly restored from a sea curse, and considered the political consequences of avian witnesses. Mireva lost the battle and laughed. This time, he did not look wounded by it. He looked relieved. 2 weeks later, the kingdom knew only the official story. King Cadron Vare had been attacked by a corrupted sea-blessing charm. Lord Ruskell had attempted an illegal regency vote. Mireva Quen, chief keeper of the Royal Sea Beast Healing Bay, had identified the altered oath and aided in restoring the king. Captain Odrin had arrested the guilty parties. The Tide Chapel had been cleansed. The coast was safe. That was the official version. It omitted the crate. It omitted Lord Whiskers. It omitted the stretcher wheel that squeaked all the way through the lower tunnel. It omitted the fact that the restored king now visited the healing bay every third evening with a basket of silverfin and a face that dared anyone to comment. The animals commented constantly. Not in words, of course. They were worse than words. The harbor seals barked whenever he arrived. Marmot tried to climb onto his boots. The injured pup, now nearly healed, followed him along the pool edge and demanded fish with shameless trust. Det watched from the rafters like a black-robed judge waiting for appeal. Cadron endured all of it with the grim patience of a man paying debts to a court that smelled of kelp. Mireva enjoyed it more than was respectful. On the 15th evening, she found him standing before the high rock. He had brought fish again. He had also brought a new slate for the medical records, bound in oiled wood with brass corners. It was too fine for the bay and exactly practical enough to make her chest ache. "You did not need to bring this," she told him. Cadron looked at the slate. "Your old one had bite marks." "Most things here do. This one is harder to bite." Marmot, who had been listening, took that as a challenge and began inching closer. Mireva moved the slate behind her back. "Do not encourage him." Cadron's gaze dropped to the seal. "No." Marmot stopped. Mireva blinked. That worked. Cadron watched Marmot retreat. "I have experience." She glanced at him. "With Marmot?" His suffering was immediate. "With seals." He said it with such grave suffering that she had to turn away. The king caught her smile anyway. He moved to the high rock and placed one silverfin on it. Mireva raised an eyebrow. "An offering?" Cadron placed the fish with care. "A memorial." She looked from the fish to him. "To what?" His answer was grave. "My dignity." She laughed. The sound rose with the gulls and the evening tide. Cadron watched her as if it answered a question he had been carrying. Then he stepped down from the rock and came to her side. No guards stood near. Odrin waited at the upper gate, pretending not to see. Pip was in the outer pen, pretending very badly not to see. Det saw everything. Cadron held out his hand. Not a command. An offer. Mireva eyed his hand with suspicion. "If this is another appointment, I need warning." Cadron's hand remained steady. "It is not." She narrowed her eyes. "If this is a request to destroy all crate records, I already did." He knew her too well by then. "You did not?" "No," she admitted, "but I hid them well." His mouth softened. The sea wind moved between them, carrying salt, fish, tonic, and something warmer from the palace kitchens above. Cadron's voice lowered. "Walk with me!" Mireva looked at the hand again. Then she placed her fingers in his. His grip closed carefully, as if he remembered what it meant to be handled gently when helpless. They walked along the edge of the main pool, while the seals watched like a rude assembly. Marmot barked once. The healed pup slapped the water. Det dropped a feather on Odrin's shoulder at the gate. The captain did not move. Mireva leaned closer to Cadron. "They approve. They are expecting fish. Both things can be true." At the far end of the bay, where the cliff opened toward the darkening sea, Cadron stopped. The black reef was visible in the distance. The tide stones stood pale above the surf. The place where he had vanished. The place where she had named him. For a while, neither spoke. The silence did not feel empty. Cadron broke it first by admitting he had been aware, in that form, of everything he lacked. Hands, voice, rank, the ability to make anyone understand. Mireva listened. "I thought those things were what made me king." The admission came rough, as if each word had to cross old defenses. She watched a wave break over the reef. And now, he looked at her. Now I know a low-born keeper with fish oil on her sleeves can identify me without any of them. Mireva's eyes stung. She hated that. Salt wind was a convenient excuse. Kadrin turned fully toward her and did not pretend it would be simple. The palace would be loud. The council would be careful and vicious in small ways. His name brought storms even when he did not mean it to. I work with sea lions, he paused. That is not the same. No, she agreed. Sea lions are more direct. The startled laugh escaped him before he could stop it. From the pool, Marmot barked. Kadrin glanced over. He is interrupting, Marmot barked again. He wants your fish memorial. Kedron's answer was immediate. He cannot have it. Mireva considered the seal's persistence. He may attempt legal action. Kedron looked toward the cormorant. Det can represent him. They both looked at the cormorant, who stood on the gate with Odrin's cloak clasped in his beak. Odrin had still not moved. Mireva sighed. That bird is going to run the coast. Kedron's answer came with royal certainty. Not while I live. She gave him a sideways look. You were a seal for 2 days. The warning in his voice was mild. Mireva. She smiled. Kadrin looked at that smile, then at their joined hands. His thumb moved once over her knuckles. May I court you? The question was simple. No crown in it. No command. No assumption that saving him had purchased her future. It stood between them like a clean bowl of water offered to a wary animal. Mireva felt the weight of the bay behind her. The animals, the slate, the new title, the life she had built from salt and stubbornness. She felt the weight of the man beside her, no longer helpless, still learning how not to make power fill every space. Yes, she said, but slowly. The tension left his shoulders by a fraction. Slowly, he agreed. She had more conditions. And no bringing the entire court to the bay. He accepted that one without hesitation. Agreed. Then she caught the weakness in his strategy. And no pretending inspections are romance. His eyes shifted toward the water. She narrowed hers. You were planning that. Only as a transitional strategy. Mireva laughed so hard, Marmot barked again. Kadrin looked toward the high rock, where his silverfin memorial gleamed in the last light. The healed pup had climbed onto the rock. It ate the fish in 3 bites. The Alpha King stared. Mireva covered her mouth. Your dignity, she said, has been consumed. Kadrin looked at the pup. The pup looked back with innocent fish breath. Then the king, who had ruled wolves, weathered curses, and survived being transported on a sea lion stretcher, bowed his head to the inevitable. It was never safe here. Mireva leaned her shoulder against his arm. He went still, then settled beside her with careful warmth. Behind them, seals barked. Det stole Odrin's clasp. Pip finally stopped pretending not to watch and burst into applause before realizing no one else had. The tide moved through the healing bay, carrying moonlight between the pools. Kadrin did not step away. Neither did Mireva. The coast smelled of salt, fish, tonic, and home. Thank you for watching. If this story made you laugh, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss our next story. We'll see you in the next one.